People can and will need to do this. It's not looking like we can actually get the AI to completely accurately correct a false positive.
Just be mindful of what you're downloading onto your phones because of privacy and scam apps. I've seen a lot of students ask ChatGPT to do its homework for them and then submit it, and they're getting caught out.
I think the fact, if you look at the companies that actually design these large language models, they come from a certain demographic and have certain agendas.
I liked what you said, follow the previous format, please follow the same structure. No, I said, yesterday I had a real bad argument with it.
So I want to open the floor to any questions.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, great explanations and great to hear your stories. A lot of what you've said has gone over me, and I think I'm quite tech savvy. Never used AI. So just for a beginner like me, just who wants to experiment and explore how it can work, what would be the first 2 or 3 steps you would suggest to somebody like me?
I wrote a blog actually for Black Tech Day. My name's Katrina Young, and on Katrina Young Consulting, I've given you about 50 tools that you can use to create presentations, everything that I use, and free courses. Please, I'm going to say again, we've got to take responsibility. Everyone I meet is like, oh, I'm not techie. Oh, it goes over my head. It just is like, ask yourself, just go to step 1. That's all I ever care about. Step 1, step 2. So you are only as good as the knowledge you had yesterday, and now you've got more. So today, there are lots of tools that you can use. I'll give you the blog. I'll speak to you in a debrief room. Tomorrow, you'll know more.
Just to add to that, I think one of the biggest things, especially for the young people that grew up with this, I know I did, is YouTube. It's literally a free educator on everything. Most of what I know to do with AI, when I started, I was thrown in at the deep end. I went from BD to suddenly I'm working with second generation chatbots. Well before GPT was known by everyone and everyone seems to know how to use it. And I upskilled myself with YouTube. So I promise you, just go on YouTube, type in what you want to know and go from there, you'll be fine.
Just one thing to mention around caution, right? So the moment you start typing in ChatGPT and all these other things, you might get links which aren't established companies. So personally, I'd start with Microsoft's Bing ChatGPT, and that will be a good starting point. So what you can do is just start asking it things. Can I ask what business you're in? Insurance brokers, right? So if you want to do, provide me insurance trends for the next 12 months, which insurance has sold the most? Which insurance is in more demand? Trying to help you plan the business, you know, fluctuations, etc., etc. But essentially, I'd ask it even to write me a plan, write me an insurance plan for the next year, write me a marketing plan for an insurance business. And that's when you can start getting more specific. So they call it head and tail. So head terms are very broad. So you start with, I want to learn about insurance. Tail terms are, I want a business plan for motorcycle insurance for July. So you go through the funnel of asking it questions. And as you get better with asking prompts, this could apply to any business, any industry, but it's that level of starting with generic, understanding what it's saying, and then going into specifics to get what you want out of it. But essentially see it as, I think someone mentioned before, I think it's Katrina, like see it as your team. You know, it can be your financial analyst, it can be your researcher, it can be your marketer. Plus side for an individual business, which is why I think, you know, we're going through a time where people could have the best opportunity to become entrepreneurs, is you can run your own business through this. The disadvantage is that it cuts out a lot of people in this trade, but they can also become entrepreneurs in whatever they're doing and just finding that niche. So ChatGPT, OpenAI, through Microsoft, great starting point, but just be mindful of what you're downloading onto your phones because of, you know, privacy and scam apps, let's say.
And also, I know a colleague that actually went to an AI and said, I want you to be my trainer. So what I did recently is we were expanding the team and I said, hey, I want you to be my marketing expert. You've got 35 years experience. I need you to tell me what my competitors are doing. And it came back. So it can actually help to be your mentor as well.
The key to that is, instead of just asking questions to it, ask it to ask you as many questions as it needs to complete the task. So for instance, you are an expert in the industry of data analysts. Ask me any questions you need to complete this task, whichever task it does. And the questions that it gives you, you answer it as much detail as you can. It will give you a more detailed response. And ChatGPT is good and is very good, but Meta also have another one called Perplexity AI, which actually has access to the internet, which is really good for giving you data sources, like online data sources relevant. And another one which came out recently by a company called Anthropic is called Claude AI. But Claude is a bit different because it can read documents up to 100,000 characters and give you outputs. ChatGPT has a max cap, but Claude doesn't have a max cap. So you have different options. Check out Perplexity, Claude. These are verified companies and vetted, but also ChatGPT is great by Bing as well.
One of the things to mention is when we're doing this work, when we're doing it for our own businesses, okay, but I've seen a lot of students ask ChatGPT to do its homework for them and then submit it, and they're getting caught out. So again, going back to the not getting weeded out of the system at an early age and, getting degrees declined, because that's happened to people who've used it for the dissertation. These are serious topics we need to talk about and tell the children and the future generations not to do that. And I simply think people are like, well, how can it know that this is ChatGPT, because it sounds so human-like? Everyone asks questions differently. It might give us all different outputs. My theory, I'm not saying this is fact, my theory is once you've asked the questions, it put an output, it's putting it onto a different server and then selling it to establishments and saying, hey, we know what's been pulled. Why don't you reference everybody's work with what's been asked in the last 6 months? And that's what I think has been happening. So I'd say just be mindful of that if anyone is using it for educational purposes. If anyone wants to read more on AI, I do actually have about 14 articles live. It's on Forbes, so I want to write for Forbes. So about 14 articles, it's on there, and I actually write about a test article I did. And I said to ChatGPT, I said, write me an article about AI, limit it to 1,000 words, and discuss generative AI. It gave me the most amazing explanation. I put it into my Forbes upload tool, so let's see what happens. It got flagged within 5 minutes. Javed, this is not your work. I mean, perfect, right, I'm going to write about this whole experience. And it was like an error of warning to everyone saying, I purposely did this, it was an experiment, and it's got flagged, and therefore be original. And I spoke about my sort of original thinking. So just to finish on that note, I think original creative thinking is going to be the most important because, like I mentioned before, ChatGPT and OpenAI is a database of previous data, sometimes dating back to just 2021. It's not necessarily got foresight. Humans have foresight and creativity. Things evolve. So I won't be too worried about that. And that's where I think if people focus on their sort of minds and creativity, that's where the opportunity is, and to inspire creativity and innovation.
Got a question around some of the large language models and some of the data sets. So, I mean, you've talked about really good ways, if one is a business owner, to use AI to improve your output and productivity. I'm curious because most of us here are going to be using it as consumers. Do you know of initiatives that can get us to contribute to that data set, to make that data set more inclusive and representative? Because what I'm concerned about is how those data sets don't really represent us. So some of the information that we do get as outputs end up being from a sort of narrower funnel that doesn't fully represent society. So can you talk about, and I guess this is part of the safety piece, but can you talk about initiatives that you're aware of that we can contribute to as citizens to make that data set richer and more inclusive so that the output becomes more inclusive?
I was at Cambridge Tech Week with Google, and Google was saying that they're actually not putting that on their top priority. So I can't actually say any establishment that you can contribute to that. That said, that's top on my list. And so I'm going through Ethica AI certification. So Ethica AI looks at ethical use of AI. So you maybe can contact them to see how you can join initiatives, or surely they can suggest it. But I think, that's pertinent. That's why as a black woman, I'm constantly feeding it. And I go back to the AI and I say, no, that's not true. This is what it is. So remember, you can correct the AI and that then contributes to the wider use of it.
I was just going to say, the more that you use it, the more you get involved. Obviously, as you mentioned, these are huge databases. We're adding to those constantly. They will be growing and improving just as a result of your work. So do get involved. I don't know any particular organizations either, unfortunately. Maybe one of the other panel members does.
On that, so there's some companies I've heard of who are putting together AI ethics boards for this reason. I think some of the things I've spoken about is like the business side, but like you say, there's sort of issues with the data, right? And the issues with the data is a representation of those using it, right? AI is just reflecting the communities that we're part of. And unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff on there. I think Microsoft created this bot once and it turned out to be a racist. But their thing was, it's bad, we've got to switch this off. It was a representation of the people using the internet or creating stuff, right? So that's where it's a mammoth task, because even if I look at some comments online, it's just shocking what people come out with these days, and they're so brave on social media. I think everyone should have an identity, but regardless, we're not there yet. So for now, I'd say there are greater initiatives which need to happen. It's a shame that Google aren't prioritizing it, to be honest.
They might have updated it.
Hopefully, let's hope they all prioritize this, but personally, I think from a personal level, it should be a huge priority. And you never know, AI might program itself to start filtering these things, right? Because it takes someone to put in filter words to understand real statistics and put real statistics against any outputs. So it could be if we're asking specific questions about a certain area, certain qualifications, like have it backed up by recognised industry bodies rather than just, Jim in the middle of Texas have said that.
Just to add on to that point, I think the fact, if you look at the companies that actually design these large language models, they come from a certain demographic and have certain agendas when it comes to input and output. And understanding that gives you a better understanding of the systems, how they're designed, how they're moving forward. Because if all of the inputs are not biased information, but information which is pushed a certain narrative, then the outputs will always be the same. If you literally create your own blogs about stuff that's happening in the space and create that link which is then SEO, then that will be add to the data set, because there's different AIs. There's narrow AI, there's generative AI, other ones which are under development. But certain ones which have access to different data sets that we create through our social media links, through our posts online, adds to the data pool. And we can technically change the narrative, but obviously it's a mammoth of a task. But yeah, it's on us to take the push.
My question was something to kind of help everybody. So as we saw with social media, it created jobs that nobody could have ever expected. Nobody would have thought that you could get a full-time job being a company's social media manager and just being on their Facebook or TikTok all day. But that's now actually full careers for people. So I think the biggest fear for AI is that people are like, oh my God, it's going to take our jobs, it took our jobs, whatever. What careers can you see that are building and are starting to like bubble up now that people can start looking at getting the skills for that are going to become the jobs of tomorrow using AI?
Prompt engineer, number one. Prompt engineer is just literally asking inquisitive questions. Also an AI advisor for a company. Someone who can advise them on like the transformation in this space and the impact, and just more to do with ethics as well. Because I feel like in a constantly evolving technological world, we're going to need more mental health practitioners, more wellness practitioners, people who can understand that if technology is going so far forward, we're going to have to touch grass, as people would say,
Yeah, I've written a few blogs on that. I've done the kind of careers that are coming up. As with every kind of technological age, there's always going to be an expansion. And I know people say about, it's going to take our jobs. They weren't even in the winning anyway. It's always the case. But for me, I moved from digital transformation. I've just qualified as a software engineer. So it just gives you more opportunities. So, I mean, I've written the blogs. If you want to know, I'll meet you in a debrief room. But you've got to be in it to win it. I keep saying that. And as this gentleman, you guys went to university, you saw it coming. I think it's about making sure that you stay ahead of the trends. I'm not seeing people hungry, looking at what's going to be coming in the next 10 years. So, yeah, I strongly suggest that.
Just to add on to what we were discussing earlier, obviously there's a lot of things that come out of the AI, the outputs that aren't correct. GPT models absolutely spew out false positives, and at the end of the day, that needs someone at the back end to correct it. It goes without saying, coding, all of these different areas, people can and will need to do this. It's not looking like we can actually get the AI to completely accurately correct a false positive as of yet anyway. And that is definitely an area that people can look to join.
I've got a philosophical contribution to your question. Trying to remember how it goes, so work with me here. We used to use our hands for work, which was replaced by machinery. We then started using our minds, which has been replaced by computers. But now we must use our hearts, because that's much more difficult to be replaced. And what I mean by that is roles which require that human touch, empathy. People, someone spoke about a mental health pandemic, not to just focus on that area, but connecting with people, I think, is one of the biggest things we're going to be missing. I was speaking to a gentleman over here earlier about, the pandemic, what that did to people, that sort of 2 years in isolation, what that meant to social trends. People are sort of a lot more separate than they used to be. I'm being less invited to less parties, that's what I'm saying. Back to the thing about foresight, what are people going to be needing? My personal thoughts is right now there's information overload. Like 50 tools to do different things. We've got how many tools? A gentleman over there who's quite tech savvy who said, I've not heard about this. Fair enough. I told someone I was in AI and they asked me a bunch of questions I had no idea about. I said, you know what? I don't know. I've not heard about that. I'm a futurist. I just talk about trends. I think about what's going to happen. Then I panic some people and say, prepare for this, time is coming. But the whole thing is, think about trends. Think about what people need. People always need food. They'll need shelter. They'll need clothing. What can we innovate? And it's not necessarily about reinventing the wheel. I think, when people start thinking, they go wild with their ideas and it's create this magical big thing. No, just take an idea, which is going already, and just improve it slightly. make people's lives easier. And I think that's what it's about. I was fascinated with, it was something at a football stadium, and there's this lady who was selling me stuff from Turkey, like kitchen utensils. I was like, wow, this kitchen utensil is amazing. Something I don't generally get excited about. There was someone else selling this sort of herbal medicine, and she was an expert in that field. So I think whatever everyone goes into is just to be an expert in that field. And like you mentioned about social media, so my day-to-day job was actually in social media management, and I've seen a trend in that. So I used to be like, kids, go into social media management. And then these platforms started coming out where you can manage it all through one centralized platform. We've got platforms which create the actual ads and text. So I'm from the actual advertising industry. And I was like, okay, kids, don't do that. Don't do that. We've got to go back to the boardroom and rethink this. So always think about trends. Always think about how things are happening and what is likely to be needed.
So I never would have thought to tell AI, like, you're my trainer, you're my market analyst. Have you got any tips for the best way to effectively phrase your prompts?
I'm going to be running a workshop tomorrow as well, teaching people how to prompt engineer as well as code and build websites and apps with AI. But one key thing is you give it a role. But the role that you give it is specific to the task that you want it to complete. After you've given it a role, for instance, you are an expert in the field of data analytics and you are tasked with, now you're giving it a task, the task with finding trends within a market across 6 years. Then you prompt it to cite data points. So you tell it to bring up different information to support each point made, and you ask it, ask me as many questions as you need to complete the task. And after you've gone through this series of back and forth, one thing I would always tell you to do is check, ask it, are you sure about this?
Yeah.
Why? Because it can spew out false data. And if it ever does stop, one thing you can tell it to do is just continue writing. But I'll give you another tip and trick. There's a Discord server from OpenAI. Discord is like a community sharing place. OpenAI have an extensive prompt template in Discord, which teaches you for specific things how to prompt. Because prompting is a job now. Prompting is a role which pays very, very well. But it's so new. It's less than a year old that people of today are learning the skill sets to become experts in that field. So if you learn how to prompt correctly and ask questions and access the whole databases and even just Google, find prompt templates, you find examples of people who can give you ways to prompt, like tips and tricks.
And also, just as he said, go back to it, double check it, say, please omit this. I liked what you said, follow the previous format, please follow the same structure. No, I said, yesterday I had a real bad argument with it. And I was speaking to someone and they were telling me that AI actually really, like you said, it's about the heart. So what I've been doing recently this week is saying, I love that. That was great. And the results have been coming out better. So you just make sure that you kind of prompt it so you're encouraging it. It's mad, but it works.
Don't forget your please and thank yous, by the way.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for the panel.